Well, hey there again everybody, Brandon here with another painting video. This time a tutorial walkthrough with some time lapse of a recent commission request. This time it is of a hunting dog after its first duck hunting adventure. So this is Libby. Libby looks to be a golden lab retriever. And so the commission request this time, the photo that was sent to me was of this dog. Here's the original photo of the dog sitting here kind of on the reeds on the side of this pond. Now the person that requested this, customer that requested this, wanted me to put a duck in the dog's mouth, so I photoshopped a duck in here to send to them for the agreed upon image to be painted here. So this is the photo I sent them. They said, this is what you want? Okay, good. So that's what I went with in terms of this painting. So if you want to check a look, or have a look anyway, at the process of this one, let's do it now. Okay, so what I have here is a 16 by 20 canvas that I'm going to be painting this particular dog project on. So again, this is Libby. Libby is a lab that went on her first duck hunting trip here recently. So to commemorate that, I'm painting this picture for them. And so I have done what I always do on my dogs here. I've got my pencil sketch in place here of the dog and the duck that's going to be there in the dog's mouth, and I've roughly sketched into the top tree line that's there and a little bit of water over here to the side. So now I'm going to start my blocking in process, and I'm going to block in all of my colors of the background darker tones of the ground and the reeds and the weeds that are behind the dog, and the water and the sky. And I will block in the dog as well, although I won't do anything else besides block the dog in until I've completely finished all of the background and the sky work. I will have that done to where the dog will be the last thing that I actually do in terms of the detail work, but I will block the dog in. So this is going to be initially all done in acrylics, and I may do the entire painting in all acrylics. If I do anything different, it's possible that I may have to do that sky fade with some oil paints over the acrylics once it dries. I'll just to see what kind of fade I can create in that sky with the acrylic paints. And if I'm happy with the fade that I get in the acrylics, I'll leave it that way. If not, I'll have to go with some oil paints to do the fade. We'll just have to see how that plays out. But anyway, I'm going to get started now on my blocking in. So I'm going to use a pretty large brush to get most of this done. I'm going to be using 2 and 3 inch brushes here and mix of colors. So we're going to start that process and get rolling. Alright, so in order to cover a lot of ground here quickly, I'm going to start out with this 3 inch brush and just block in some sky color. And I'm really just going to be fading in, or attempting to fade in, this early morning sky, which is just a really light kind of a grayish blue at the top that fades into just where that sun is starting to creep in, a little bit of an orangey yellow glow at the bottom. So I'm going to block that in initially in a close enough color anyway to what we're trying to achieve, and then we will come back once this is dry and see how good of a fade we can create in these acrylics. Maybe we can pull it off. We'll find out. So now basically with this largest brush here that I've got, I'm just trying to get in this yellow color here and then reflect those colors into the water here to the left, and now I move into blocking in the darker background color of where all these grasses and reeds are going to be underneath the dog itself. This is just a real dark mix of some black and brown, some gray in there, and then the tree line in the distance. Now the water itself again is reflecting most of that sky color that you really can't see because it's not on the canvas. Alright, now that I have got the background and the sky blocked in the initial colors in acrylics there, I'm going to let those dry while I start to block in now the dog and the duck that's in the dog's mouth. So I'm going to block these in so I have the whole thing with this initial blocking layer done. And then by the time I get done blocking that in, all of this background and sky will be good and dry, and I can go back and start working on it. And the first thing I'll do is work on that fade and that skyline in acrylics and see if I can get it faded the way I want. So let me get started here blocking on this dog. And again, this is just putting in all the darker shades and tones into the areas that they're going to be. Same thing with the duck. So I'm going to be using smaller brushes now. I'll probably use this 1-inch brush on some of the dog, and then I'll drop into some smaller brushes to get into some of the finer areas. And we're going to get started on that now. So really I start here on the vest that the dog is wearing, just a darker green color to put in. And then some of the darker shadow areas of the legs and the stomach there, the ears, top of the head. And then I basically go from darkest to lightest stuff as I'm working these blocking in layers in. So I'm laying in some of the lighter fur areas before I go into detailing around the eyes and the nose here with a smaller angled brush. And then the face itself is the last thing that I block in here with the shades that I think are going to be the most present when I go to do my initial detailing. Then the duck itself is just a process of putting the right colors in the right places. So this is a mallard here with the dark green head, a little bit of blue on the wing and on the neck there, and then gray for the feathers. And then lastly the feet, a little bit of an orangish color here on the tops of the feet. Alright, so now I have gotten my initial blocking in layer done. Again, this is all acrylic paints at this point, and I have just basically blocked in the darker tones and the colors of the areas that I intend them to be in. So it's starting to take a little bit of form here. Obviously got a long way to go, but for now that this dog and duck I blocked in last is drying up, I'm going to go back and focus now on the sky. And so we're going to see about getting this color fade of this early morning glow looking the way we want with some acrylics. And as long as I can get it pretty decent with acrylic paints, that's the way I'm going to leave it. So we'll see what we can get. Okay, so I'm using some professional soft body acrylics from Liquitex on this, just so you'll know. And I'm pretty happy with that fade. The soft body professional series paints on acrylics, to me, fade a lot better than some of your entry priced stuff. So that's what I'm using on that, and I am pretty satisfied with that color fade. So we're going to roll with all acrylics on this one. Again, I find acrylics a lot easier to do my detailed work with because it dries fast. So when I'm putting these layers down, I can come back on top of them with other colors, and I don't have to worry about mixing any color together. So I'm going to continue on with the process now, and I think I'm going to start with what's furthest away. So I'm going to deal with the background line of trees, and then just kind of start working my way forward and dealing with this water and the back behind the dog here. I'll save the foreground detail for the last in terms of the background, and then we will deal with the dog once we've done everything else. So I'm going to work from furthest away, coming forward, and go from there. So the next thing to do after this background, or this sky that I just did, dries, we will start working on that distant tree line back there on the back side of this pond that they're on. So we'll give this a few minutes to dry, and then we'll start with that. Alright, and so now my acrylics up here in the sky are dry, and that didn't take but a handful of minutes there, probably 5 to 10 minutes tops, which again is one reason why I like working with acrylics in this scenario. Now I can come back in here and start working on this distant tree line, and I don't have to worry about mixing any paint back there. So I am going to just start with a small angled brush here and start dotting in that distant tree line back there. And I'm trying to keep, again, the perspective and the distance there by keeping my tones and saturations of these colors down back there. I want them to look kind of faded and washed out, obviously, because that will make them look further away. So I'm going to dull out these colors with some black and some white. I'm going to gray them down, dull them down, and start putting the tree line in back there. So this tree line process is really laying in a really lighter faded out color first, and then darkening up the centers of it just to give it the appearance of it's off in the distance and there's a little bit of that sky glowing from behind it. So the central areas are a little bit darker and thicker where the tree trunks and the leaves in the middle of the tree are, with the edges being a little bit more transparent or translucent to see that background color coming through. And then the water here is just a matter of blending in some of the colors that's getting reflected there, some of the reflections of the tree line, and some of that grayer sky as the water line comes down further with a little bit of reflection highlights on it. Alright, so I've pretty much finished the sky and my background trees at this point, and I am going to finish detailing out this little bit of this tree line on this side, and then I'm going to finish up the water. And all I really have to do to the water is just add a little bit more of the reflection stuff in there that's coming from that tree line, and I'm going to drop in, there's about 3 duck decoys that you can see on the water that I'm going to add in there, and just a few little touches of the ripples in there. That's all I'm really going to do for the rest of that, and then the water will be done, and the background trees and the sky will be done. So then after I finish the water, I can concentrate on all of this grass that's behind the dog here and then in the foreground. So let's get started finishing this up, and all I'm really going to do here is I'm going to add in a few highlights of the distant ripples that are out there. Okay, for now I think I'm done with what I'm going to do with the water. I've added a couple of duck decoys in there, and I've thrown a few, reflection highlights in. So I'm going to leave it for now, and I might be completely done with it, but I'll wait till I put these foreground grasses in front of it to make sure that I like the way that looks when it's done. But for now I'm going to switch over to this side, and we'll start dealing with these reeds and grasses that are back here behind the dog on this side of the canvas. So there's a few I'm going to be carrying up into the skyline, obviously. Some cattails, I guess, is what they might be. It's hard to say from the photo, but I'm going to start adding these grasses in here now. And it's just going to be a layering process here, is all this is going to be. So I'm going to have to work in numerous layers here and go with smaller brushes as I finish them out. But let's start with the ones that are tall across the back, and we'll kind of move our way forward here. And putting all these grasses and reeds in here at this point is literally just a layering process. I thinned the paint down a bit to put these smaller grasses in the back. And then as I work my way forward, I actually swapped brushes here to a smaller angled brush to do some of these larger blades of grass. As I move a little bit into the foreground with it, and then back to a liner brush to add in the smaller little pieces and details. And it's just a matter of, again, layering it, maybe lightening up the values a little bit on top of it to make them appear a little closer as they come forward. And then you just keep at it until you make it look nice and full the way you want. And then I start adding in the closest foreground here the green colors and textures that you can see coming through there, a little bit of greens and some light tan and browns back in there that become more visible, obviously, as it's closer to the back of the dog here. Working on this grass on the other side, it's mostly a liner brush here to get these little individual pieces of grass that are visible coming and extending above that water line. So this again is the same process as I was using before, as I make these larger in size as they move forward and closer to the foreground. Just mostly doing it with greens and brown tones at this point. As these reeds are a lot closer to you, obviously you can see a lot more detail in them, a lot more color on them, but there's definitely a lot of them down there. So I'm trying to give the appearance of a lot of layers of grasses and reeds in here without necessarily trying to paint every individual one in high detail. So it's a little bit of a tricky process, but layering it in here and then bringing the saturations of the colors in more here in the foreground right at the front of the canvas, just to again give the appearance that this is a lot closer to you. You'd be able to see that. And I try to add as much detail as I can on these closest grasses and reeds in the foreground here, just again because it is closer to you. You could see that detail if you were there. Just trying to add to the realism of it here, and adding some edges of lighter tans and browns where some of the edges of these weeds and grasses are dried out. Again, just trying to add as much realism to it as I can in the process of layering this forward. Okay, at this point I am going to start working on the dog and the duck that the dog's got in his mouth. I'm fairly satisfied with the bulk of the background and the grass and everything. I may do some final touch-ups and tweaks to it once I get the dog looking right, if I determine that I need to change some detail level a little bit. But at any rate, I'm at least at a point now where I am going to start working on the dog and the duck, and I think I will actually do the duck first and get that looking right, and then we'll work on doing the dog as the last thing that we work on. So let's get started on this mallard duck. And if you see me do any of my other bird paintings, basically this is going to be a similar process. So I've got an initial block in layer here of the colors in the areas that I want to put them, and now I'm just going to go back in here and layer dark tones and light tones on top of each other to finish detailing this duck out. And you know, it doesn't have to be obviously an exact perfect match to anything on a bird like this, because their colorations are all slightly different, and as long as I get the main things right, you get the dark green head and some of these blues in here along these feathers. You know, it doesn't have to be anything specific in terms of exactness, because they're all slightly different and depending on how they're sitting anyway. So we're not going to get too carried away with that. We're just going to paint this up to where it looks pretty recognizable, like it's a mallard duck. So hopefully we can achieve that. In detailing out this duck here, it's literally just a matter of putting in the darker colors in first in the areas that they need to be in, and working the lights and the darks back and forth to create these feather textures. And you know, along the wings, it's the same process. You just try to create the illusion of the individual feathers there by putting in the darker areas and the lighter areas, and working them to create the feather look on the bird. Okay, well that pretty much takes care of everything except the dog itself. I may end up, you know, after I paint the dog in, adding a few final touch details to some of this grass or the duck or whatever. But I want to get the dog detailed in and finished to see if I need to enhance anything else, so to speak, to kind of match the detail that the dog goes in with. So I'm going to say I'm pretty much 95% finished with everything else except for the dog. So we're going to get started on the dog now, and again I've got it blocked in with my initial colors. So I just need to come in here and refine some of these edges and then start working on the shades and tones of these colors to make this dog look right. So I'm going to start with my usual process of just shading in colors and going back and forth between the lights and darks until I get it looking the way I want it to look. So we're going to get started with that now. And now the detailing of the dog process here. I just started with the vest. It's just a good starting point for me, and really again it's just working darker and lighter tones in again. You got to create the look of that vest with the stitching along the back and on the shoulders here, and just make it darker on the chest where the dog had been probably in the water getting a little wet. Moving to the dog itself, so these lower legs, I wanted to give the appearance of a little bit of a muddy look, dirty look to him. This dog had obviously been out in the water there retrieving ducks, so I'm layering in some colors here to create the fur texture along these feet and legs, but then I'm also going to be working in some of these darker coloration to give that wet, kind of dirty looking appearance to the lower areas here of the dog. I'm using pretty small brushes at this point to lay an individual fur and hair texture, and it's just going through here and adding up different colors and variations of the color to make it as realistic as possible. You'll see me bringing in the darker coloration now, again trying to give it that muddy, dirty look on these legs where that dog had been in and out of the water. And last but not least, obviously, the face itself, which is usually the last thing I do on dogs. The ears were a pretty easy thing to do here. You just basically put in some darker and lighter colors on the ears to make them look the way you want, and then working on the face itself, it's kind of a tricky deal of getting the shades right to give that dog's facial appearance what you want it to have, and most of these dogs have that kind of darker V looking shape there underneath the eyes that you have to work with a little bit, and then getting the eyes correct themselves can be a little bit tricky sometimes, so I'll play around with those a little bit to get them looking the way I want. But it's the same type process here, adding in lighter tones and darker tones and kind of working them back and forth, switching from one to the other until you get the finished product that you're looking for. A few final details, moving out now with the liner brush, adding the little chain on the dog's neck there. A few finer details around the face, the nose, and the eyes with the liner brush. And a signature. And so that is my completed process on this one. This again is Libby, commissioned request that I got. Libby sitting here on the bank with a mallard duck hanging out of her mouth in commemoration of her first ever duck hunt. So if you enjoyed that one, give me a thumbs up, drop a comment if you'd like. Subscribe to the channel if you hadn't already for new videos coming out. And until then, happy painting everybody.